So, good morning, everyone here in the room and online. You are welcome to the Nordic Business Ethics session of today. I'm Salla Tuominen, and I'm the head of the corporate here in DLA Piper, Finland. Today's themes is ethical resilience in supply chains in changing world, and it is really topical matter as we all know. There has been a lot of discussion and a lot of new regulation, either up and coming or already in force. A lot of discussion of whether the regulation is really necessary, who should it be targeted to, is it too much, and so on. But also the current environment geopolitically has really much shifted the current environment. But there are also simultaneously rising expectations to transparency, responsibility, and accountability. And at the same time, companies need to make decisions what comes back to ethical choices. Circumstances where the information is not complete, situation is unsecure, control is limited, and sometimes trade-offs are unavoidable. And this all is precisely what why conversations like what we will have today matter. Business ethics is not only about knowing what the rules say, as we all know. It's also about judgment. It is about leadership and courage in situations where the rules do not give a complete answer. It's about how organizations behave when the legally correct answer may not be the whole answer as such. And when the most responsible path is not always the easiest, fastest, or most commercially convenient one. For DLA Piper, having been collaborating with Nordic Business Ethics has been very fruitful. I think we have also learned a lot during these sessions what we have together organized. And that's why we have so much valuated and highly appreciated our collaboration during these years. But at least for now, this is now the last session for these live ethics talks together. Something new might be bubbling under. And that's why I want to, from my heart, thank Nina, Anna, and Sanna for the whole thing, for the very fruitful collaboration during these years. And I really think that it's been very important that you have been able to brought the business ethics discussion here in Finland, but also widely in the Nordics to the discussion much more than what it has been in the earlier times. So thank you for all the work, and we have been of course delighted to have been a part of that work together. So I will give the floor now to Nina and to present our discussion, our theme in a little bit more detail, the discussion, and then our superb panelists here of today. So one more time, welcome here in the room and online. Let's get started.
Thank you, Salla. And a very good morning here in the room and here online, everyone. And Salla, thank you so much for the kind words. So it's been a truly pleasure for the Nordic Business Ethics Initiative to work with DLA Piper, and you're not going to get rid of us. So we'll figure it out a way to continue the discussion together. So, and absolutely, we are still coming to your nice premises. So it's the best in town. And So over the years, we have talked about business ethics, human rights, sustainability due diligence, and the changing legislation from soft law to hard law in quite many sessions. And in that sense, the topic is nothing new. But I think what will be unique in today's discussion is that we go into the details of how to actually have that ethical resilience and how to really navigate in those situations where on paper things might sound like a very simple, let's be transparent, let's have a great due diligence process, let's be responsible, let's know our business partners. But in reality, we have a lot of situations where things are not that easy, and they are not just the perfect or easy answers. And when we were choosing these themes, I thought that now we need here some expertise on people who actually work with global supply chains and who really actually have been there on the ground to understand what is the reality when working with suppliers, with thousands or tens of thousands of suppliers who you are supposed to have this due diligence process with. So first, I'd like to introduce Niina Elomaa from S Group. So everyone here in Finland knows S-ryhmä, and Niina is leading there the sustainability work, helping to bring the everyday operations and support sustainability leadership across the group. And Niina also serves as the board of directors and administrative council of WWF Finland and is a board member of the International Amphory Sustainability Network. So thank you, Niina, so much for joining the discussions. I know you've had a really many years experience in these themes and a lot of nice stories to share with us. And then we also wanted to have some academic side for the discussion. And for that, there was only one person who came to my mind when I was thinking that who would be a person to discuss the practical dilemmas in a very interesting and engaging manner. So Nikodemus Solitander comes from the Hanken, so the Handelshögskolan här i Finland in Helsinki. And Niko's main areas of work include corporate responsibility, business and human rights, and how companies and their partners shape responsible practices across borders. And Niko is also interested in how to teach these topics well and how to develop the learning methods. And I've been personally a student in his class, and I know that it's very powerful way of making people to think. So I hope that in today's conversation, we all start to think and find new angles for this very topical conversation. Over to you, Anna.
Great. Thank you, Niina. And so great to be here. And also thank you to Salla and DLA Piper for hosting these Ethics Talk Lives. So as Niina said, yes, it's not over, but there is a season for everything. And we felt that this is a good talk to have, and then we will regroup and see how we will continue the discussions. So, but thank you for all who are in the room, and also those of you who are watching online, either live or as you watch the recording. But let's go to the discussion. So we actually have chosen a headline for this seminar that I don't know if I actually like, but you know what? I think we need to challenge ourselves. So we say it's ethical resilience in supply chains in a changing world. And why do I not like this headline? Well, we put the buzzword resilience into the headline. And those of you who are following the sustainability discussion know that resilience is a word that we are introducing to the narrative. And why it's a bit provocative for me, and then I want to hear your definitions, Niina and Niko. But I think let's not think that changing vocabulary will change the real issues we have at hand. Because we've talked about corporate responsibility, corporate social responsibility, sustainability, and then we had ESG. And now, ESG is a very political term, so we shouldn't really use that. And then we think, resilience, that's a great term. So now we talk about resilience instead. But fundamentally, it's still the same issues we are talking about, right? It is how we as organizations and companies can operate in a responsible way in terms of how we behave, how we make our profits. And also when it comes to resilience, for me, why I'm a bit provoked by that term is because then we turn the lens towards our organizations. How can we be resilient as a company? But maybe we forget, the responsibility piece. So that's just, I love the theme. I think it's a really important discussion, but I just wanted to put out the disclaimer there that resilience for me is a bit, I'm divided on the topic. So why don't we start with you, Nina? What's your view on resilience, ethical resilience? What does it mean for you, and how do you view that topic in this current context?
First of all, I want to say thank you very much for bringing up that kind of narrative and the buzzwords, because I think it's also interesting that what you described, it is totally true that we have been kind of talking about these same things with different words. I was thinking about this resilience and what does it mean? I think it's more for me, it's about kind of having the long-term perspective, what we should do. How should we behave towards the world? When we are talking about the planet or the people? And I think it's also that the kind of the fundamental thinking inside the organizations, that what is our kind of responsibility towards the world as a kind of a wide perspective. It's also in this kind of when you come up in the situation which are quite difficult to decide what should you do, then you should go back to the kind of the fundamental values that the company is standing for. And I think that's what the resilience to me means, that it is in these difficult situations then trying to be strong and have the long-term view what you are going to do and what you really want to reach. That's what it means to me.
Yeah. Nico, what about you?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for inviting me. Really great to be here. It's a difficult question for me because my research is largely on, in a sense, words in a sense. So I am a discursive researcher to a certain extent, and I want to lift up that words are not just words. I mean, it carries a meaning, and it has consequences also actually on the praxis, in a sense. So we need to be aware of that. The bad news in a sense for this panel is that historically I've been very wary in a sense of using both terms. I work at a business school, so I know in a sense that once you start utilizing the words of ethics and ethical, in a sense, that it also already carries a meaning at a business school. There is a sort of a norm of going more towards utilitarian ethics and that kind of, or even a kind of instrumental ethics. So ethics is not an empty word in a sense. It carries particular meaning in particular context. So in a business schools, I would not, in a sense, like to call for ethical resilience, because that would insinuate, in a sense, that we would need to go back in a sense to the dominant thinking of the 1980s, which is, in a sense, what is the representative ethics of business school at large. And also the word resilience can be a little bit problematic because it implies that we need to go back, that the status of something that has been disrupted needs to be built back, in a sense. And I think in general, in sustainability, we should really be focused more on the future, on transformation, and thinking in that terms rather than thinking backwards. But I think for the panel, it's actually a very good signifier to use, because we are now in a situation where EU and the omnibus, as we will come to, in a sense, have disrupted what we think we knew about how to govern change, and much of the discussion is actually, should we go back, in a sense, which also carries a promise, but it is also a little bit problematic, I would say, but we can come back to this later.
Yeah, great reflections. And yeah, it's we shouldn't dive into too much of the semantics, but this could be a panel in itself, right? How we label things and how much that actually carries. And sometimes sloppily, I think in our organizations, we just change labels and don't understand, what that implies. But let's then agree on that we want to be practical here. So whatever we label it, this panel is about going practical and also talking about the dilemmas and challenges we face today with, well, both supply chains per se, but also the regulatory context. So Nina, over to you then in terms of really what it means in practice. How do you see that companies now are approaching these themes with the changes and challenges we have? And maybe you could say a couple of words about S-Ryhmä as well to the international audience who doesn't really know your business. So maybe you can just explain a little bit, what you do, how does your supply chain look like, and how do you approach this in practice?
Yes, thank you. S Group is a Finnish retailer, so the biggest retailer in Finland, but we are operating also in several other business areas. So we have restaurants and hotels. We work with, we have gas stations, so everybody in Finland knows the ABC stations. We are also in the department store business. We have even bank and so forth. So we are more or less in everybody's everyday life here in Finland. So, but we are very, very Finnish, operating only in Finland. So we have just recently sold our operations from Estonia, where we were retailing as well. But maybe the challenge when it comes to the supply chains is the huge amount of suppliers and partners that we have along the supply chain. So I would say that in the first years, we have around 20,000 suppliers with whom we are working. And part of them are also local small suppliers here in Finland, but mostly then also reaching out, of course, to the different regions around the world. So in that sense, and we are in Finland, we are a big player, but then of course it's the normal challenge that everybody feels and knows, that when you are in the global supply chains, you are a really small player. And that brings then the challenge also to us, that what are then the actions and activities that we can do? What is our force and what can we do there? But that is the, I would say also the kind of the big challenge that we are facing. And then about what are the companies and what are the companies thinking at the moment? I think that in a way, when we talk about, for example, the regulation and this kind of geopolitical situation, I would say that one word that comes into my mind is actually confusion. Companies are very confused. What should I do? Should I wait and sit and see what happens with the regulation? Is there again coming another omnibus? What has happened with the EU deforestation regulation? Should I sit and wait? And then there comes the 6 months time that you should implement. And that's then, of course, the challenge to the company. So I would say confusion is one thing that the companies and organizations at the moment are feeling. And at the same time, of course, as a big company like we are, doing this changing and doing this kind of transformation that Nico was also referring to requires kind of a long-term view, that where are we going? Because you can't first start running and then stop and taking it back and then run again. And that's why also what we have done is that we believe that this regulation is coming. We believe that this is going to that direction, and we just go. And then we are trying to sometimes run, and then we take it a little bit slower, but we can't stop because it would be really, really costly. So the thinking, and I say this very strongly, that EU Commission says that this omnibus makes it cheaper or is cutting the cost. And I said, no, that's not the case. It's total, and I will not use the word, but so in that sense, I also want to tell everybody that I think it's wise just to go forward and a little bit look and try to be, of course, cost effective and think about these things. But I feel that you just need to go. But the confusion is the word that comes into my mind.
What about your view, Nico? Because I guess when we talk about these things, confusion has always been there to some extent, right? Or
Yeah, or at least I would say that exactly what Nina was hinting at, in a sense, this extremely reactive nature, not only of the corporations themselves. We need to understand also that EU is not a monolithic actor as such, but also how, in a sense, the political parties are reacting in a very reactive way to things that are ongoing and so forth, causes a lot of uncertainty. I mean, I'm old enough, in a sense, to remember when every sort of thing that was, in a sense, normalized was the weight and how important regulative certainty was supposed to be. In a sense, that was also what we taught at business schools as such. And now that kind of thinking seemingly is out of the window, that it should carry no weight whatsoever, and that the corporations are supposed to really not trust, in a sense, the words of the politicians, because people like Nina and myself, who have been working with these topics for a very long time, given from different perspective, in a sense, can see the writing on the wall, in a sense, why certain parts of this kind of regulation is needed, and why this sort of pendulum that we see now will most certainly sort of swing the other way eventually. And that is why perhaps this discussion that we are talking about ethical resilience is more about strategic resilience, in a sense that if you have a strategy, you cannot constantly change the core of your strategy, in a sense. Then it's not a strategy, it's some kind of tactic that you are constantly working around as such.
Exactly. Oh, what a conversation. And here I'd like to remind that it is a conversation. So if we have in the audience insights or questions, feel free to share those. We actually do have a list of questions already here. So I think, we will not have time for mine and Anna's questions, because we have excellent questions that we got from the audience. And let me drop the couple of first ones here, and Nico and Nina, feel free to share whatever comes to your mind. So these are about risks and controls. So the first question is about what is, in your view, some emerging risk in the global value chains that you think that the companies are perhaps underestimating? And secondly, what would be the kind of a key from 3 to 5 operational controls for the ethical supply chain that actually would work in practice? Any thoughts for either of these questions? What are we estimating, and what should be the controls that we use in practice?
Well, I think that one of the risks that we are probably a little bit underestimating is kind of the related to the transparency requirements that are coming in, and what is the role of, for example, the data that we need from the supply chains. It's a question that we have been discussing decades, but there seems to be, in my view at least, kind of little bit an illusion that they are more transparent than they really are, and it's easy to get that data, and it's becoming more and more difficult. And that is also part of the regulation challenge, because the regulation also says that you are potentially not allowed to ask these questions from your suppliers, and that becomes kind of an illusion, and it's really difficult then for a company at the end of the supply chain or the value chain then to be aware and evaluate the risks, and then to prioritize, for example, the risks that you are having. Coming then to the operational controls, one thing that what we have, or what I have kind of realized also within S Group is actually that the controlling of the fact that when you are making the decisions in a company, the business decisions, how well it is actually integrated, that you take into account the sustainability topics. I'm not talking about the resilience, I'm using the word sustainability. And that is something that I have been figuring kind of quite a lot, that what are then the kind of the methods that you should have in the discussions when the decisions are made, that they remember to take these things into account. That's one thing. Another thing that I would emphasize is also kind of the dialogue with your suppliers. It becomes more and more important to have that dialogue, and also then to have the kind of evaluate the possibilities for collaboration along the value chain. The questions that are coming more and more kind of difficult, they are not in the hands of one company or one single operator within the value chain. They are things that you need to do together. And this is also, in my view, from the business perspective, a cost-efficient way of working. We are potentially along the value chains also kind of realizing the same risks. We are prioritizing the same risks, and then everybody runs with it with the same topics. Why don't we do it together? And this brings then the kind of the common platforms and different forums that have a role to play, so that we can also then handle the challenge related to the competition law, that operators and the actors can work together. But this makes it also kind of extremely important that we consider that how should we do this, and then we also potentially have the possibilities to increase the leverage.
Yes, so I was just criticizing others in a sense for their propensity to look backwards, and I'm not really the best researcher to actually say much about the future, but I will attempt something in a sense. I mean, the low-hanging fruit is to say something about AI in a sense, because we already see, for example, the rise of AI-driven double materiality analysis in a sense, and I think there lies a great potential in that, but there are also a lot of risks involved in a setting where, as the heading, for example, here already implies, that it is about some kind of ethical sense making when it comes, for example, how to make sense of what happens in the supply chain, and how we should make some kind of ethical judgment in relation to their own sort of foundational values of the organization, for example. But there are other aspects, I think, also of AI that we have not yet seen. We already see in the supply chain the rise of algorithmic wage suppression, for example, that I work myself quite a bit with sort of business and human rights. And I think that is something that will be quite hard in a sense somehow to govern or control, especially if we are talking very deep in the supply chain in a sense. But to be honest, if and when this comes, it's probably not only going to be a problem deep in the supply chain, but also quite central in a sense to some of these key actors in the supply chain as such.
Yeah, I just love this answer, because I know that so many of us are thinking how to utilize the AI. So very important aspect. But then I have a very practical question from the audience here, as well as we know that part of the sustainability due diligence process is not to walk away immediately when you have a red flag. But we have a question here that, have you ever been in a situation where you have chosen to walk away due to some ethical concern? And what was the element for the business partners or decision makers that triggered it? Nina, I'm looking at you if any of the real life examples comes to your mind.
Well, we have, of course, been in a situation, but where we have kind of stopped the business, for example, from certain areas. And one of the things that comes into my mind is in our textile supply chains, and the China and the Xinjiang area. And that was then where we have right now also kind of the requirement that we don't accept the cotton coming from that area. We still have it. But we have also had the kind of the opposite situations where our partner has actually said that we are not able to work in that certain country. And we were thinking that, okay, we need to find another partner. And we had a long discussions with the kind of the parties in that specific country, and that country was Myanmar, that should we leave that area? Should we kind of step out and stop then the business relationship there? And we got so much information about the situation in the country and what would happen if we would do that decision. And that was so shocking that we decided that no, we are going to stay there because it's better for the people in that area that we still continue, because the kind of the alternative for them would have been quite devastating to know what would be the profession that they would have after we leave. And these kind of things, we have done these decisions that we leave, but they are quite rarely. And normally also our partners, when there has been a challenge, they have been ready to make that change. And it has been it has taken some time that they can change the way of working, but we have been pushing and also collaborating with them that what should they do. So we try to avoid that situation that we boycott something, but there has been these cases, and it is still in our toolbox, but it is the kind of the last resort that we have. So we try to make the change first.
Nico, any thoughts from your side? When to walk away, if ever?
Well, I do think that there are certain red lines. I actually myself, I am in a double role in my own organization. I'm a researcher, but I'm also Hanken's associate dean. So I am responsible in a sense also for our supply chains and so forth. So I, just as an example, now in the internationalization of the university world, because of the changes in government funding, it has become more and more profitable in a sense to bring in international students in a sense. And Finnish universities and ammattikorkeakoulu, what is that, vocational schools, do not have the capacity in a sense to have personnel outside and marketing to the students in Nepal or something like that. So they use recruitment agents, and there is absolutely no control in a sense of what the promises of these recruitment agents are, in a sense, what do they promise the students, and they can promise things which leads to very, very bad situations, also actually labor exploitation when they come to Finland and work in restaurant business or even worse sort of risk conditions as such. And there we have had situations where we have also in a sense needed to terminate the contracts with these recruitment agents because there is no possibility of control. In a sense, it would require exactly these kinds of interventions that Nina was saying, because you cannot just say that we will stay and it will become better, because that is where the real work in a sense happens, where you need to put in resources in order to build the capacities of the suppliers in a sense. And I think that is in a sense very central to understand when we talk about these decisions not to withdraw, that comes with a certain responsibility then of strengthening, and not only telling them that you should become more ethical or you should become more stronger, because that usually implies that you don't understand what the context that they are operating is actually, and what kind of possibilities or non-possibilities they have for change in various directions.
Thanks for sharing that. I think it's a very good that we talk also more about these type of practical cases where it seems it seems a lot that there is this win-win, but then in reality we have these ethical issues. But then I want to hand over the next question actually to you, Anna. There are several questions regarding the changing geopolitical landscape and the evolving regulation, especially related to China's new legislation. And I know you have some first-hand information on what's happening there. So any thoughts from you, Anna?
Yes, a lot of thoughts. So I will try to be crisp here. But Yeah, so maybe for those of you who are not aware, I think the question relates to this new law that entered into force in China in beginning of April. And I know many of us, we receive newsletters and so on, and I received a newsletter, or we received information that now it is illegal to do supply chain due diligence and audits in China, and that was kind of the first message I got, and I think this is what you were referring to, Nina, like the confusion. Then suddenly you're like, oh, we have the U.S. Forced Labor Uyghur Act. Many of you, or if you are importing into U.S., that's something you have to comply with. You have to affirmatively demonstrate that you do not have anything coming out of the Xinjiang region in China. So otherwise you cannot import into the US. That's a very specific law. And then now you have in China a law basically saying that you cannot do this due diligence. So I work for a global medical technology company. US is our biggest market. We have a global supply chain. We also operate in China. It's our one of our top markets as well. And then I was coincidentally, Nina, referring to firsthand information. I was in Shanghai 2 weeks ago, and then I thought, why I need to understand this law a bit more. And I sat down with some external counsels there to really understand what is this Chinese law about. And as a precaution, we put our due diligence and audit programs on hold because we felt, okay, we just need to understand that we are not doing anything here that would expose us in a way. And as far as I understand, and a huge disclaimer, this is not legal advice by any means. These are just my personal reflections based on discussions that I've had. But I had one colleague in China who said, well, this is just, politics becoming codified in law. This is now what we see all over the globe, where, you have a political agenda and the politicians are then using a legal instrument to enforce that. And it seems that this Chinese law in particular is it's a trade instrument and also specifically aimed at Chinese suppliers not being discriminated. And also what I have understood is that, yes, it is possible to continue doing due diligence and audits in China. So that's not per se what the law is aiming for, but it cannot be discriminatory. And what does then that mean? And I think that is what each company obviously needs to assess. And one practical example could be that for being very specific with banning one particular region, or just asking very explicitly, like, okay, are you operating in this particular region? And if the supplier answers yes, and you don't continue with them, that could be an issue. But then how do you navigate that? I have still understood it's okay to ask about forced labor and so on. That is illegal in China as well. But you can ask about that, and you can ask where suppliers are operating, and then you do your own risk assessments. I also see that, we have our business partner code of conduct. It's a contractual element that we put in place with our suppliers. So if we apply that consistently. But as said, this is confusing. I think as companies, the most important thing is to understand the spirit of the laws that are out there. And as was said here, you are operating, you have a company strategy, you want to be successful this year and in 5 years and in 10 years times. And how do you navigate that? I think regulations will always come and go. They will be more or less political. I think we're now in an area where they are very political, and you just have to navigate that. I don't think there is or will be like a crystal clear answer, but it's really about navigation. And but I think it's also very interesting because these kind of contradictions leads to quite interesting discussions in organizations as well, because you said, Nina, are these considerations part of the business decisions? And when business decisions are made, you want to have a yes or no from the legal or compliance teams. And in this context, we cannot really give that. We can say this is a best best effort. So yeah, challenging indeed. It's not a full answer to the question, but at least this is how we are reasoning at this point in time.
Wow, thanks Anna for sharing, and I'm sure Nina and Nico, you have great insights here as well. But we also have a question in the line, maybe related to this or then not, but I'll hand over to Sanna for the question.
Thank you. Not related to what Anna just mentioned, but I think it's a great question. What do you think about the role of ratings and assurance companies? Do they add value in assessing the ethical issues in the supply chains?
Maybe we'll take this question and then go back to the complexity. Nina, Nico, any thoughts?
Sure, I can start. I do believe that they give some value. Now the question is that do they give us as much value as it has been led to believed in a sense on a historical basis. And my problem with the rating agencies is in a sense the dominance historically of thinking that everything will be solved through some kind of transparency in a sense, because it is in a sense this absolute emphasis on transparency over impact in a sense that has led to the kind of critiques that sometimes is actually very founded. I can myself say also with Omnibus and the amounts of data points that is required in some of these directives is over the top, let's put it this way. But that doesn't mean that I'm supportive of Omnibus, because it swings in a completely different direction than just sort of how do you say dealing with that kind of problems as such. But my message when it comes to rating agencies and transparency and so forth is that we need also to understand that this is not some kind of agenda that EU has come up with, in a sense, this idea that it should be focused on transparency, that historically corporations are also political actors. This is exactly what corporations historically have lobbied for, because you can regulate in other manners as well. You could regulate more towards the impact of the activities or particular technologies or something like that. I'm not saying that it's a better alternative, but we need to understand that CSR has built on this notion of if you as a consumer or in a B2B relationship just have all the information available, you will make the best decision in accordance with a kind of an ethics or not. So yes, I do think that the rating agencies do have a value, but that value is probably not as high as you are led to believe by this kind of absolute sort of hierarchy where transparency is put at the top rather than impact per se.
I think that was a great answer from Nico, and I fully agree, because I think that they have a value, but maybe they are at the moment thought that they have a bigger value than they actually have. and I think it's really important that you have to also understand the impact, you have to understand the risks that you have, and you have to work with those topics. So it's not the full answer, it's a tool in your toolbox. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I think it's they can. So some of the ratings as well, I feel, are maybe not so much on the supply chain side, but just coming to my mind, there is the CDP, the carbon disclosure one, where I feel you can sort of pay to get a better rating as well. Like if you pay for consultancy services to understand where your gaps are, and then suddenly, well, you improve. So yeah, I think it's important to be aware of that. This is one tool, but it's also can be a bit misleading as well, because it's also a lot based on what the company is answering themselves, and not, as Nico was saying, going to the real impact and how the company fundamentally is driving change. And that's I think a theme that I want to make sure we have time to discuss, because I think that is exactly one issue that we have today, that we can due diligence things to death, I feel, and we have the processes. And Nina, you were alluding to that, all companies, they do due diligence, and then we arrive at a certain point where we face the same issues, and then we work with those in different ways. And I think, Nico, you put it so well. You said if you don't walk away, if you stay in a high risk situation and you do not put in the effort, you do not understand. You have a lack of understanding of what is actually requires to have an impact and to drive change. And I'm wondering, is it even possible with kind of this approach that we have today, that companies should do due diligence and then take some kind of responsibility for what we find? Is it possible to drive real change? Because in many situations, it's a societal issue that we face. And so I guess I'll pause there. That's my first question. Then we'll come to the collaboration piece. But can we have an impact?
I think we can, but we have to be also kind of understand that it is sometimes extremely difficult to make that change. A very practical example. We did in 2023 kind of a deep dive in two of factories in Bangladesh, again textiles, that are producing private label products to us. And we were concentrating on women's rights and children's rights in our study. And they were two factories that we have been collaborating quite a long time. They became a lot of positive issues what have been happening there in the factories, and they were factories that are in a very, very good shape. And there was also kind of challenges coming up, and we wanted to touch upon one important thing that was related to living wage. And we were a little bit like idealistic in that situation, because we were thinking and discussing also with the business that should we do a kind of a pilot that we start paying a higher wage for the factories. We were something around, can't recall it right, but let's say we were around 10 to 15% of the production of the factories. And we were thinking, okay, how should we handle it? When they are doing these things for S Group, are we then paying the living wage? And then when they are working with others, then what is happening to their salary? An issue. Okay, then we decided that, okay, let's try it this way, that we also discuss with the other players who are there working with the same factories, that if they would go along with this kind of thinking. And then we started to discuss with the factory owners and the factory management, and they were like, oh, Nina, that's a very nice thought, but have a look outside of the window, and there is another factory, there is another factory, and there's a lot of factories around. When the people and the workers are going to hear that we are paying higher wage in these factories, there is going to be a riot. And we were like, oh yes, you are totally right. And that's the kind of the challenge that you are also referring to. You have to understand the kind of the situation on the ground, and then think that what are then the ways to kind of collaborate and have that discussion also with the other kind of stakeholders. And so we decided, okay, can't do it. And that's a kind of a very practical example of the case that you were referring to. So there might be within the companies kind of the will to do, but it becomes impossible. In the environmental area and some of the projects that we have done in the European countries, for example, we have been better kind of, we have had better experience to do that work and have that kind of impact in the area. But it is sometimes quite difficult to change the situation and have your own kind of activities there. You need to collaborate. When I was working in Fazer, we had a very positive also kind of experience in collaborating with the cocoa farmers, and we could see the change and do these projects and have that impact when you work. But it can be sometimes difficult.
Yeah. Nico, what's your view on impact for real?
Yeah, I would start by saying something about the supply chain. That the supply chain is not a sort of a natural occurrence as such. It is a very particular way of organizing your activities in a sense. And historically, the critique towards the global supply chain has been that it is by design designed in a way that responsibility cannot be found, in a sense that you split up the responsibility in such a way that it is impossible, in a sense, to have control over that. And on a sort of shorter historical basis, the argument from those using global supply chain as a form of organizing has been that it can indeed be governed. That is how you legitimize the use of global supply chain. Now, interestingly enough, we are at a situation where almost these very same actors are positing that it is actually not possible to control whatever goes on in the supply chain, which actually delegitimizes global supply chains as a form of organizing for the companies. That once you vocalize that you cannot control it or you cannot govern it, at least for me, it undermines greatly, in a sense, the legitimacy of supply chains or global supply chains as a form of organizing as such. And as S-Group is a good example, I think on the other hand, you can control and you can govern what goes on in the supply chain, not to 100% or something like that, but what it usually requires is that you have a deep understanding of these local situations, in a sense that it is only by having a deep understanding of the local situation that you can make these kinds of decisions that can be seen as ethical or unethical or ethical, in a sense, but that actually requires a lot of knowledge about the chain itself, and that is, of course, a huge investment in a sense, both in terms of resources, but also in terms of knowledge. And my personal view is that, based on research, is that if you cannot have these kind of acquire local knowledge about what is ongoing in the supply chain or understand the context, then probably the global supply chain is not the correct organizational form for your activities. Let's put it this way.
Great. So I think before concluding, as we always run out of time, we have one excellent question from the line where we are looking for a quick answer before the conclusion. So Sanna, go ahead.
Thank you. Do you see that the current and coming legislation, like the CSDDD, focuses more on cleaning the mess than supporting real systemic change and long-term sustainability?
Wow, what a question. I can see Nico smiling here.
Well, if I always say that CSR as a sort of organizational action is always reactive, then of course directives and laws are perhaps even more reactive as such. So the CSDD is a manifestation of the failure, in a sense, of corporate reactions to these sustainability challenges. So from my perspective, the simple answer is yes. Of course, the real answer is much more complex than that. But
Nina?
That was a very good question, and I think that I have been very supportive towards the CSDD, and of course I'm still supporting it. To me, it was a little bit disappointing that it is only now for the bigger companies. I was hoping that it would be more like overall to everybody kind of legislation. I hope it will help, and I hope. What I feel is the good thing about that legislation is actually that it will raise the discussion in the companies, that what should we do and how should we handle that. But I'm not sure what is going to be the real result, and will it really kind of help in the way that the sustainability becomes more evident along the supply chains and how the due diligence is then handled. But I hope. I'm still supportive.
We all do. So we have a couple of minutes left, and kind of wanted to summarize. So in this context where we all want to be sustainable, we're expected to be sustainable, but then as said, it's more complex, it's more confusing, and we are not always able to be as sustainable as in the kind of dream life. So what would be your kind of a last message for this audience in terms of what is realistic, what is reasonable, and where we should focus? Big question. I'll give you 1 minute to answer. Who wants to start?
Well, I'm not going to even attempt some kind of deep answer on this, but I'll go back just to what I started with, in a sense that for me it is really about strategic integrity, in a sense, and if we want to call strategic integrity, label that as ethical resilience, then so be it, in a sense. But I think it is the values of the companies and the strategy of the companies that should drive the activities of the companies, not these kind of constant reactions to what is happening outside. Of course, you need to react to them, in a sense, but they should not be the main steering instrument for your long-term vision of your activities, in a sense. Of course, this hinges on that your organization has a long-term vision, how to survive or how to produce value, which is not a given either, but at least in those contexts where such exist, I think this kind of more strategic thinking is needed rather than constant sort of reaction and tactical thinking being the main strategy in an instance.
That's a great answer. Thank you.
I would also stress the kind of the long-term vision and the strategy, because I feel it needs to be integrated into the business strategy, and you should have then the long-term view, what is going to happen in the world. I still believe and I want to believe that even though the legislation and the regulation seems to be sometimes a little bit chaotic, it's not the only driver for the businesses to do this work. We do it because we see that the world is changing. We need the transformation. And I also believe that if we think about the geopolitical situation in the world right now, it might feel that we are failing in this area, or it is not on the agenda. It will swing back. But there is actually, and we feel it, that the consumers, our customers are asking about these things, and their expectations, you need to answer to that. So you should be very cautious in the companies to consider that topic as well. What will be the kind of the future demand for these things? And there is still a lot happening. So I still believe that this is also one big driver. And when the politicians and the legislation is not producing the things that the people need, they turn to the companies and they expect more from us. So I think that can be the major driver also.
Wow, thank you. So beautiful words and great conversation. I think personally, I like the word ethical resilience because I think the word ethics is kind of makes us all accountable to think what is it that we do for this conversation. So thank you so much, Nina and Nico, for your wise words and thoughts. I think we all learned a lot and got a nice food for thought. And thank you for the audience here in Helsinki and online, and DLA Piper for all these endless ethics talk live. So this will definitely be an end, but continuation for this very important conversation. Thank you, everyone.